Welcome. This was going to be a panel, but I was the last man standing, so it's just me for the whole hour or so. Hey, Paul. So my topic is, the question is Freethinker just a euphemism for atheist? And this is a departure from my usual research. I am a linguist, so you know, I'm branching out. I've organized my talk into two main sections. One is dealing with apologetics and challenges. Some of the arguments. My goal for the first half is to demonstrate that religion is not monolithic. That any critique of religion to be sufficiently nuanced really needs to take into account particular doctrines, and that they're not all equal. In the second half, I look at reason, religion, and authoritarianism and their approaches to evidence, faith, doubt, and challenge. Okay. So starting off, I developed a scale to organize my presentation order, and I decided to start with the most concrete ideas about religion. The fundamentalist doctrines, and then down to rationalism, which is essentially God as a metaphor. I used the word concreteness. I started with orthodoxy scale, but I just settled on concreteness because of something I read recently about the more concretely you hold to your doctrines, the more concretely you conceive of God, say in anthropomorphic terms, or just very traditional terms, the more your behavior starts to look like maladaptive behavior, like if you're rigidly tied to ritual, it starts to look like OCD. If you're rigidly tied to if you hear voices in the wrong context, you're schizophrenic. Maladaptive behaviors. So I'm working in that order from the more fundamentalist to the more sort of general metaphorical, where I think most people are. You sort of have a vague sense that the universe isn't entirely indifferent, which I think is where a lot of people are. So I think any critique of religion has to take into account that that there are differences, not just between religions, but also within a religion. The way you identify and what you actually believe is not necessarily connected. So I'm starting with the intelligent design argument, and then I'm going to move to faith and faith. And so the red zone, the danger zone, is more sectarian and more supernaturalistic beliefs. And the green zone are more benign beliefs, universalism and rationalism. And I hope to demonstrate that they're logically flawed, but they're relatively harmless compared to the more extreme beliefs. And agnostics in the middle, the neutral position. All right, so starting with intelligent design. Intelligent design has two problems. One is the evidence doesn't support it. The other one is that the conclusion, doesn't follow. Saying that God did it because you don't understand is just it's just an a priori default, for which there's no justification. But also, if you look at the evidence from physics, cosmology, phylogenics, natural selection, DNA. Fossil dating, natural selection, I got that twice. Endogenous retroviruses, embryology, atavisms, chemistry, neurology. All of this stuff argues against intelligent design. And I can elaborate more on that in the Q&A. I'm not sure how much, how the science geekage in the room is. There might be people more qualified to address those questions than me. Then onto the faith and faith argument, and this is a favorite argument of the atheist scholars to take down, they point out that it's a solipsism that is sort of a willful delusion that you accept. You know, you accept because you can't accept it not being true. That's essentially what a solipsism is. So your faith is a virtue. You are virtuous. You must believe, and because you believe, God exists. Okay, so it's like willful accepting of the delusion. That's a solipsism. I think one of the things that gets in the way of honest debate is the way we use the word faith. You know, there's faith in a proposition, a truth statement, that, you know, if you accept it blindly, it is, you know, it's a form of credulity, your gullibility. On the other hand, if you have faith in a principle, that can be, you know, contrary to the evidence that you'll be successful, then that's, you know, that has a heroic quality about it. And so I think, you know, when we use the word faith, I think it's important to talk about what kind of faith. I think a lot of the atheist scholars, they don't qualify faith. They don't say blind faith. They don't use that qualifier because faith is something that's resistant to evidence. Okay, so by that definition, there's no need to qualify it by saying blind faith. And they're clearly talking about faith in truth statements and not in principles. I believe in the principle of academic integrity, but do I believe all my students are? None of my students cheat. That's a truth proposition. Then there's the doctrine of non-overlapping magisteria, and that is where, you know, religion gets its area of inquiry, and science gets its area of inquiry, and there's really no reason why they have to. There has to be any tension between them. Well, the problem with that doctrine is the overlap. Okay, the way miracles are defined, they temporarily suspend the laws of nature, and so there is this encroachment on faith. You know, faith is encroaching on the area of expertise of scientists. They're making claims about cosmology, about physics, about biology. And then there's multiculturalism as embraced by universalists. And the problem with this position is that you can't it is a bit disingenuous to simultaneously affirm mutually contradictory beliefs. Okay, in defense of universalists, the belief systems that they simultaneously affirm, they're in the fuzzy belief realm. They're not the mutually contradictory sort of this general sense that the universe isn't indifferent, but it's not, you know, my anthropomorphic God versus your anthropomorphic God. So it's in the area of the more benign beliefs. But as some of the critics point out, this actually provides cover for fundamentalism. And then the rationalists. I was a rationalist for a good long while, although I secretly thought of myself as an atheist. But I was in involved in religious communities, so I was a rationalist. So again, you know, religious doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. You know, you could be a complete atheist and identify as religious. You have religious practice. You have a ritual life. Problem I see with with rationalism is that it projects modern sensibilities on these Bronze Age texts. I'm not saying that rationalists aren't conscious of what they're doing, but I think, I think the allegiance to these texts is misplaced. Who but Rick Santorum thinks that the Bronze Age was the apex of human achievement? So why do we start with these texts as a starting point for our dialogue about ethics and truth? So I think there's a certain bias in that preference for your faith community's text. And then the texts are thorough. If you want to promote the myth that your sacred text is the starting point for your morality, then I think that's a disingenuous position, because you're overlooking overt antagonism toward reason. You see from the Adam and Eve story onward, the take of the tree of knowledge. The Abraham sacrificing his son. What kind of object lesson can you take away from that other than blind obedience? It's just to project a modern sensibility on that story is just an exercise in tortured logic, or enhanced logic, the government, I guess. And then you've got the children of Israel are ordered to exterminate entire populations. So there's approval of genocide, misogyny, slavery, homophobia in all these texts. And so, to me, that using these texts as a starting place for the dialogue is just not rational. And I think what religion has done, though, is it's provided a place for that dialogue. But I don't think that But I see there's a lot of evidence that our ethical understanding is intuitive. I mean, in fact, we wouldn't need the word sociopath if not for the fact that people who don't have empathy are outliers. So if we didn't already have intuitive morality, we could come to agreement without turning to these texts. All right, so now just to summarize, I've looked at these doctrines, and then in red on the left-hand side, because they're indicating that they're logically flawed, but some are more benign than others, and some just give cover to fundamentalism. So these are not totally in the clear to the extent that they provide cover for fundamentalists, but in and of themselves, they're particularly benign doctrines. They're not particularly malignant doctrines. So this is the second half, looking at reason, religion, and authoritarianism, and their approaches to this is sort of the life cycle of a thesis. Okay, in reason, religion, and authoritarianism. Now, I started with science, but then I wanted to be more inclusive, so I went to reason because I didn't want to exclude material philosophy and just the way. And I also wanted to stress that we all practice science. Our life is like a science. We trust our experiences. We trust our observations. We don't document them as meticulously as scientists, but we're always hypothesis testing. Whether we think about it overtly or not. So acceptance. In the absence of evidence or contrary to evidence, reason, science views that as credulity or gullibility. Religion calls it faith, and authoritarianism calls it compliance. Okay. Can you all see the Hitchens quote? We need to read it. Oh, okay. I didn't want to distract people with the quotes, but pretty much support the arguments. I wanted to get those subliminal messages in. And then the response to doubt in the absence of evidence. Science views it, and reason views that very positively as skepticism. It's healthy. But religion views it as cynicism, and authoritarianism views it as thought crime. Okay. Support for your thesis. In reason, it's through evidence. In religion, it's divine coercion, threat of eternal reward and punishment. And then, not just divine coercion, but also had the Inquisition, the Crusades, long history. In fact, in the Islamic world, you can still be put to death for blasphemy, which is shocking. Surveillance, he sees you when you're sleeping. Oh, sorry. Detention, torture, death. Hitchens likes to point out that God is the ultimate despot. But at least when you live under a despot in the world, you can die, and there's no claim on you in the afterlife. This is a great quote from Rushdie. What is freedom of expression without freedom to offend? It ceases to exist. So, responses to challenge. I'm using the Hegel's dialectic language here: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Because again, I'm not focusing just on science, but philosophy. So, positive terms, antithesis. We'll dialogue. The last thesis standing is the one that's most viable. In religion, it's blasphemy. In authoritarianism, it's sedition. Reform, religion's very traditionally, historically, very resistant to reform. Hegel, synthesis. In religion, heresy. In authoritarianism, subversion. And when thesis rejection, paradigm shift in the material world, apostasy in religion, and treason in authoritarianism. So putting it together, you start to see the picture emerging that everything that reason views positively, religion and authoritarianism view negatively, and vice versa. So you start to get the picture of just the underlying authoritarian nature of religion. And again, going back to the first half of my presentation, the more rigidly you adhere to the doctrines, the more authoritarian you are. So, some of my conclusions. There is some solipsistic thinking implied in some of the questions that people ask about atheism, or the critiques. Isn't atheism presumptuous, amoral, grim? This is a, intellectually bankrupt, morally bankrupt, emotionally bankrupt. And, besides just dismissing it as solipsistic thinking, even if atheism were true, I would reject it on these grounds. Okay, I wouldn't accept it. I would willfully continue, with the comforting delusion that I've grown up with. Dignifying it with an answer. Intellectual, moral, and emotional development implies intellectual, moral, and emotional autonomy. If a parent neglected any one of those aspects of a child's development, you'd say that was an unfit parent. And yet, in religion, you're actually encouraged to view God as the source of all meaning, all truth, and all ethics. So, that is my presentation. I have some open questions that I thought I'd like to throw out at you. I think there are a number of open questions here that my presentation provokes. One is, how essential are supernaturalism and sectarianism to religion? We know the rationalists and the universalists get by without those doctrines, but How satisfying would that be to, as a general model for religion? If people could continue to gravitate toward universalism and rationalism.
I just saw on the Smithsonian channel this morning, which I don't watch voluntarily, my husband makes me, that Thomas Jefferson cut out all the supernatural sections of the Bible to make his own Bible. I thought that was fascinating.
What's left over?
What's that?
What's left over?
Very little. It's a very thin volume.
He has a whole section at the American History Smithsonian. We stopped by there, and it's actually really interesting to read his philosophy on religion.
Yeah, I mean, my apology that I missed a portion of your beginning of your presentation, but I guess, for example, I mean, when you were talking about supernaturalism, the virgin birth, and I mean all that sort of thing, I'm like, how can anybody believe this? I mean, it's you're trying to rationalize, anything, but at the same time, it gets down to what you just said. It's blind trust of whatever's happening. A rational mind can sort of try to figure out a way. Secondly, is how do they do not actually even see the fossil record. When you say, well, what about the dinosaurs and the pre-dinosaurs, before the dinosaurs? They have no concept, but they don't know where to go. So, you try to sort of converse with someone in a rational way, and there's no way. Any suggestions on that?
Oh, wow.
Don't.
Are you high? I don't know. That's, wow. I don't.
You don't.
Sometimes people are just too far apart to ever, find common ground. I think there's an orientation to the world, to knowledge, and I think that's, once you reach adulthood, you're pretty well set in that, maybe.
It's like saying you believe in Santa Claus, but you know that it doesn't believe, but you still believe it because it's told to you.
I think the people who take more umbrage with atheist critiques of religion are the people in the middle, because I think they understand that they understand the problems, they understand the need for their faith community to reform and to become even more rationalistic, and they don't have a lot of affinity for fundamentalists in their faith community, so they take umbrage at the atheist critiques, but they also, they want to keep the fundamentalists at arm's length. So I think there's a lot of room to dialogue there, but if you're too far apart, you may never come together.
But I mean, I'm asking, how do you break that down? Because as somebody who was an extreme fundamentalist, getting ready to go to the ministry, it is now known as Paul the Atheist. I don't know how I got that title, but it did. One of the things I discovered in my work with helping people make that transition is we like to dump knowledge, we like to do a fact dump, and these people aren't ready for facts. They're not open to facts, and the facts don't matter. So what I do is I ask a lot more questions and allow them to unravel.
Right. Yeah. What do you actually believe?
Yeah, and there's a great model called the meta model, MEDTA model, and it's actually a systematic way of asking these questions that results in the unraveling.
So like a flow chart?
Yeah, no, it's more like looking at the language they're using and then asking a question to match it. But I find that we want to dump a lot of facts out there and prove we're right. And it doesn't matter what evidence we present. They're not going to hear it because they live in this magic world with virgin birth and resurrection.
There's also another, another technique someone mentioned the other day, where you find common ground. So, maybe appeal to their sense of fairness. So God wants women to be subservient to their husbands. How is that fair? And try to find common ground there, something like that.
I think to answer the sort of blind, so the sort of blind obedience that almost religion seems to kind of promote, is to do, I think, with kind of fear, and how fear is kind of used in the wrong way. We see, historically, we see fear used to control people. Nazi Germany, just for an example, off the top of my head. But, religion is similar. Essentially, when you're raised, kind of the nurture versus nature, you're nurtured to sort of fear not believing. So that has a lot of an aspect for you to actually believe what's in the Bible, because if you believe otherwise, you have this fear in the back of your mind that I'm going to be punished. So fear can do a lot to a human mind. So that could lead to sort of blind obedience.
Actually, that goes into the point of also the salvation. Belief that if you do not do these items, you're not going to be saved. Hence, you're not going to go to this place, whatever that is. And obviously, different religions have different places, but in many ways, it's the same thing. So whatever you want to call it, from garden, whatever. But it's the same thing. But it's basically based on fear.
And I think that's another way to appeal to people's sense of fairness. Is it fair for somebody to go to hell because they believe a certain way? There should be an ideological litmus test for salvation. How is that fair? And if if you're born in the wrong part of the world and there's no way for you to get the gospel, but you just out of luck.
I just remember saying last year when was the earthquake and flood in Japan. Someone in the south said they deserve because they're not Christian, because they're Muslim, they're Buddhist and whatever. And I'm like, that is so stupid.
Well, there's a dualistic thinking there. There's if good things happen to you, it's because God is benevolent. If bad things happen, it's because God is mysterious.
People
that
they don't get
rock stars tell us that all the time.
Right. So you had your hand up a long time ago.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. You were using Hegelian keywords in there with synthesis and all those sorts of things. And he wasn't a materialist. A lot of the critics who came after were materialists, and you kind of said, oh, well, materialist philosophy should be included in this. And what side do you stand on that? Because obviously, Hegel had a lot more emphasis on emotion and creativity and that sort of thing, while materialists obviously.
Yeah, I wasn't really taking a position on that so much as not wanting to be just, focused on science is like the representative of all things rational. I wanted to include material philosophy, as opposed to, and I was, deliberately opposing that to, theology, which is philosophy of the immaterial, the supernatural.
Yeah, I'm still puzzled by materialism. Do you mean like a history of materialism with
No, I'm talking
atomism,
about the
or-
material world. Philosophy that's focused on the material world, as opposed to theology. I was just making a contrast between theology, which is focused on the supernatural, and naturalism. But I was avoiding naturalism because it also has religious connotations. There are naturalists, transnaturalists, which is another word for rationalists. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. A comment about debating and discussing religion with religious people. As an atheist, I found it more difficult to establish a conversation with a moderate religious person than fanatic. The fanatic is like more clear cut. I mean, you ain't nowhere. But with those who call themselves moderate, they are very elastic and elusive, and they manage to accommodate. I mean, pick and choose the dogma of the that's what the other thing I mentioned. I'm not sure I know the difference between apologetics and apologists. We use them, but
apologists are the people. Apologetics is the argument.
No, with apologetics and apologists use both words. I'm not really.
Well, I'm identifying the people who promote the particular apologetics. So fundamentalists are more inclined to support intelligent design. Religious moderates may be less inclined to support intelligent design, but they may still use the faith and faith argument, etc. So who's the defender of that particular doctrine? That's the apologist.
Do you think, to what extent do you think education, when people are young, can make a difference with this? You know, there's an old criticism. You know, Schopenhauer was outlawed in the academy in the 19th century, essentially, for claiming that you couldn't get a job, say, in philosophy unless you pretended there were good reasons to support theology. And he winds up saying something to the effect that if we revoke the privilege of religious people educating our children to believe in magic books that drop out of the sky or things of that nature, then no one would recall those ideas later in life. But I think that's as if they're inborn, innate ideas.
Right.
But I don't think it's that simple. It seems to me that there's a lot of factors why people are very much adamant about clinging to those types of views that you're pointing out here. Like part of it's psychological, don't want to die, other things, I just don't know.
Did you want to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of deep-seated even further than that. Even in the basic thought, I mean, we have all these defensive marriage acts and all that sort of thing. It's defined in the government, all these religious practices as well. So it's not just something you learn. The family is obviously a big part, but since family is constructed through pretty much how society's set up and through the government now, since they say, oh, it's a sacred act, it has to be defended, and we have to give it tax incentives, that sort of thing, to set up in the way they want, which is supported by the scriptures, and then it just reproduces itself. So it's a lot more deep-seated than just educating, because it's kind of just the whole way of life has been surrounded in the principles of it.
I think you're anticipating my second question actually a little bit, because I ask how in a free society can we exempt any ideas from critical scrutiny and even ridicule? I mean, I just posted on Facebook this this libertarian lifeguard letting people drown, and it's perfectly okay to ridicule people's political beliefs, but somehow religion gets a pass, and I defy anybody not to laugh at that picture. Even if you're a libertarian.
I saw it.
So
We should tax them as well.
Yeah, Tom will. So yeah, I think this heretics aren't burned at the stake anymore, but there's a lot of social pressure to be polite and to be respectful of people's deeply felt beliefs. But if we don't put them out on the table, we're not really going to, we're not going to have any resolution. People are just going to harbor resentments, and there's not going to be honest dialogue.
I always think as long as there's this pull from past generations, almost history is kind of pulling on the future generations and is constantly trying to still promote to this day its dogmatic sort of core beliefs. As long as that's the case, it's always going to be a struggle. There's always going to be some sort of wanting to eliminate that sort of free thought, free thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as an educator, I feel that I have a sacred trust to promote the intellectual development of my students, and so to the extent that these ideas are relevant to my teaching, I don't want to feel constrained in my expression. I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my students if I don't challenge any unquestioned dogma.
I think the main problem is the public views of atheism is pretty much the same as nihilism has been promoted by religious leaders, that if you don't have religion, there's no morals, there's no any of that stuff. And so I think the biggest thing, if you ever want to be able to discuss anything with religious communities, is to show that there are morals outside of religion, and be able to bring it together.
Yeah, in fact, the contrary argument that atheist scholars bring up is that there's something craven about needing the promise of reward and punishment as a reason to do the right thing. And I think that I think religion has sort of crowded out civilization's development in developing a secular basis for morality, and which is so I think you can reconcile the points of view that religion has sort of, or these even the sacred texts have sort of provided a canvas for us to project our ethics on, and that engaging in that dialogue has been something that has moved civilization forward, but it's the monopoly has sort of prevented us from coming to that, from using our modern sensibilities as a starting point instead of Bronze Age arbitrary dictates that nobody really adheres to. Even fundamentalists don't adhere to all of the fundamentals of their religions. Everybody's a cafeteria. When was the last time anybody stoned a disobedient child in this country?
I don't know if you read a book regarding the evolution of religion. We have the Aztecs, obviously worshiping the sun and so on. In different parts of the world, in, let's say, ancient times. And those people had their own religions. And those religions evolved to Christianity and, having a Seder as the Last Supper and, Jewish people, obviously, and then having that be the roots of Christianity as we know it today. But even those have evolved. So how can anybody just believe in a section of with their own belief of their religion and forget about everything else if they really believe in religion, how come they're dismissing everything before that? I never understood that one.
I apologize, just to kind of go off of that. I think it's just being afraid to almost believe in it or be a hypocrite to some degree. It creates a bit of a cognitive dissonance in us to sort of go with one belief, but then kind of question it at the same time. So in order to avoid that, we sort of just eliminate and get rid of the past sort of things that contributed more or less to the religion. I actually saw on History Channel the other day, they were talking about exactly your point, is the fact that it sort of did evolve. A lot of the different aspects were sort of picked and chosen from different religions. Days of, for example, when Christ was reborn, that was the exact date that was taken from a different religion. So stuff like that.
Or Easter, having the eggs, which means fertility, and spring, renewal. All
as
these
far
things
back
are
as
taken
ancient
items,
Egypt,
but yet they're taken as sanctity.
Almost every holiday is started as a pagan holiday. They just added gifts. Hey, if you come celebrate with us, you get a gift.
Or food.
Or food, yeah.
Christmas was a...
And then that was a big deal.
Yeah, they're like, oh.
Do you think one of the reasons, if no politicians in the United States can be openly atheists.
There's one.
Right.
Okay, one. Okay, there's one. But I'm wondering why that is the case. I always get the sense that when people come out as an atheist, right? If I tell you that I'm a Catholic, you can immediately infer some things. I probably accept the Pope's teachings, or if I'm a Buddhist, I don't believe there's a deep self, or whatever. If I'm Muslim, I'm not going to want pork and down 6-packs at your house. But if you say that you're an atheist, people don't know what that means. Does it mean you're a Maoist? Does it mean you're a radical Marxist? Does it mean you're a secular humanist? So I think atheism scares people in a way that they don't know what to make of it at some point.
I think it's a little bit like homophobia, the ones, the gay bashers are probably have internalized homophobia because of some feelings they might be having. I think it's natural to doubt, and I think people who are struggling with their own doubts are probably afraid of atheists.
Hume is famous for being a skeptic in early modernity. And he winds up somewhere making the claim that skeptics have never been good at politically organizing, right? So, unlike people like, I know that God, so I wonder to what extent that,
Well, we're trying to fix that.
That's changed.
Yeah. But I think it's, they're just now becoming, there's just now emerging some awareness about, what common ground non-believers have, and starting with the fact that there is this, contrary to what it says in the Constitution, you can't get elected president if you are open about atheism.
Well, also kind of going off of that, our founding fathers were all deists.
Oh,
I looked
I
this
know.
up.
Yeah.
It was all, I mean, Thomas Jefferson quote. You know, it doesn't really make any sense. When they're saying how Constitution is, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense these days, especially in the Republican sort of sect, where there's a lot of sort of pull towards or push towards religion, and God bless this, God bless everybody. You know, but then they obviously don't know their own history, because if you look at that, atheists and deists.
Right.
A lot of that is actually fake, though. The Republicans use that as a scare tactic to get votes, and that's what they're like. Somebody went in and did a poll in, you know, the poorest counties, and they said we always vote Republican because it's God's side. Like, so you're voting for the people that will not help you because they're saying that they believe in God, you know, and it's angry.
Oh, well, this occurs to me that on your chart that you showed earlier, you had religion and authoritarianism lined up side by side, and they basically have different words for the same thing listed all the way down.
Right.
So when you think about how authoritarian, like, political parties might act, they will act in those religious ways. So there's an actual, like, synthesis there. They think similar thoughts. You know, it's apostasy, and it's heresy, and it's treason. These are all the same thing, you know. So we, you know, I think that's why they team up, in my mind.
I mean, if doubt is a thought crime, you have to think that maybe there's some underlying, you know, authoritarianism.
Mhm.
You know, if it excludes you from redemption. Yeah.
How would atheists deal with, say, the African culture that has its elaborate religious practices and, you know, all religion is deeply embedded? You know, I guess what I'm saying is, don't get me wrong, I'm wondering if there might be some kind of implied elitism to this, cultural elitism.
Well, some of the more strident criticisms are against monotheism, because, you know, there's a God with the monopoly on your loyalty. I don't know what the theologies are.
Say polytheism.
Yeah, polytheism gets up pretty easily in atheist critiques because it doesn't have the monopoly. It doesn't have the monotheistic monopoly on your adherence. In fact, pantheism is arguably not theism at all. It's just more of that generalized idea that the universe isn't entirely indifferent. It's sort of fuzzy belief. Everything happens for a reason. So, you know, you might be talking about something like that. But I don't know those theologies well enough to give an expert opinion. Yeah.
And the only thing I can say to that is there's two things. One is because they're sort of somewhat benign, they're not trying to kill you. You somehow forgive them. Two is you see them more as a cultural thing, not necessarily a religious thing, at least from my point of view, westernized. So unless I went there and they just want to kill me because of religious practices, then I would sort of say, yikes, you know, let's do something about it. So those two things I can sort of see that. But at the same time, I do agree that the Western world sees them as, you know, more elevated, higher thinking. And in fact, I hardly will say that atheists, we think that we're smarter than most people. So because, like, we already have been enlightened, if you want to call that word, if you want to use that word. It's like, how can these people be so stupid and believe this nonsense? So you start thinking that it's like, I'm really enlightened more than they are.
One of the points
that I agree with.
One of the points I intended to bring out in the part about how religion is not monolithic is that you know, you have theistic and non-theistic and pantheistic religions. What unites them all is, you know, the idea of self-transcendence, first of all, but also belief in unseen agents. And so, in that sense, there is a critique that applies to religion in general, which is that if you externalize agency to unseen forces, then you're undermining your own agency. And that's probably the only legitimate criticism of religion as a whole that I think applies across the board.
I think we need to remember a careful here so that we don't get too cultural centric. I would agree that in the United States, in the East, we as atheists are more likely to evaluate or comment on monotheistic belief systems. At the same time, if we were planted in the heart of Africa in a polytheistic environment, we would be more likely to speak out against that belief system because that's the one that most commonly interacts with us and we interact with it. So I'm willing to bet that if we went to Africa and found an atheist in that environment, he would be yelling about all the different gods people are worshiping. So I'm not sure if that's an accurate statement.
I think that's a good point. You know, we all have an axe to grind with the religion we broke away from. So that's probably a question for an African atheist.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point because I think we are even atheists in this culture. We're guilty of being hyper-politically correct. So we can criticize the Bible, Islam, and those, but when it comes to Buddhism, it's like we always venerate it. It belongs to Smithsonian. We have to look at it from National Geographic point of view. We can't, but personally, I think Buddhism and the Immaculate Conception are equally ridiculous because we are always concerned to criticize primary cultures, or whether it's like pre-Columbian culture or African or Far East, but there is some fear in us still. We can criticize the three monotheistic religions, but the other absurdities, I use that word, right? We shy away from that.
Yeah, I've heard the criticisms about the Enlightenment being Eurocentric, but I don't think there's anybody who would want to turn back the clock on the Enlightenment.
A point with that too is that, say like pagans, for instance. I mean, like, how many atheists attack pagans? Pagans don't go out of their way to push their religion on you. They're not in politics trying to say, you know, you have to worship this tree and this ground. They just sit there and go, like, at least in my experience of many pagans I know, they do their thing, they keep it to themselves, and they're not trying to force other people. Whereas
nobody was demonstrating to insist that that they call the tree a Saturnalia tree.
yeah, it's like, but Christianity tries to push, you know,
Right.
the anti-gay movement, the abortion limits, the women's rights, you know, that's why we get more angry about those things, like.
But again, I'm going back to the point that that's the dominant issue we have to deal with. I would make the argument that paganism is just as dangerous as Christianity, and Christianity is just as dangerous as Buddhism, because none of them are based on empirical evidence. And if we allow pagans to dictate law or policy, then we would be getting into anti-vaccine and just crazy stuff like that.
I don't think there's any danger of pagans, you know, trying to assert hegemony.
But if that were to happen,
I don't even think they're inclined that way because, you know, the monotheistic, monopolistic it's more essentially authoritarian.
A couple of years ago, there's an article in the Pew Report that did a survey of people of all different religious demographics in the United States. Some evangelicals, some slivers of Buddhism or Hinduism, and people came out as atheist, agnostic, and they found it and they gave them questions about different religious traditions and what people believe across the globe. And the group that scored the highest was the Jews were the second highest, but people who identify themselves as atheists or agnostics scored the very highest, right? So it turned out that atheists and agnostics knew more about world religions than all of the other religious orientations. So, but you know, frequently it's pointed out that look, the United States is extremely religious in some senses, yet just not about other people's religions. And what I guess what I'm wondering about is why is that? Because Canada is not very religious at all. And someone asked me this last week. It's like, why in the United States are people so gung-ho on religion, whereas Canada's not? Does it have something to do with it? history of slavery or something? I don't know what the answer is to that. Do you have any insight into that question? Why specifically the United States is so, I mean, very religious compared to just Canada? Canada.
That makes sense.
I have some insights, but I think some other people do too.
I think her hand was.
Well, going back to what she said about how we feel about religion in Africa, you know, it kind of makes it seem like atheists are all activists, and that's not necessarily the case. I have 4 children, and I love to talk about this. This is my favorite subject, and this is the only child I can get to participate with me. The rest of them just look at me and go, "Mom, you're the only one who thinks about this." And yeah, my children are atheists, but probably nobody knows, except for me.
Oh, is that apatheism? Yeah, apatheism,
So yeah, they think all religion is equally ridiculous, and psychics and all that stuff, they just aren't going to tell you.
Yeah, I tried to, I put the question to my class. We were doing a reading about the image of women, and I asked my class, who identifies as a feminist, and not a single hand went up. And I think there's that generational perspective where if you don't know what happened to get us to where we are now, you're not as invested in the struggle. It's not that we're,
And I'm guilty of that too. I'll say to people, no, you have to vote. I mean, I've told women, no, you, what do you mean you didn't vote? You have to vote. You must vote. It's not an option. Just so I'm like more on the activist side. But there are a lot of people who are out there just passively being atheists.
Yeah, I think I don't think people understand what's at stake. I mean, Santorum's done a lot to raise awareness about why we don't want to live in a theocracy. But I think, when I think of ritual clitoridectomy, I think, there is, in 2 words, you've destroyed any sort of relativism about religion.
Well, what religion actually advocates or endorses that? The World Health Organization pointed out that attempts to connect it to Islam are false, and even,
But it's a ritual practice. It's not a medical practice. So the point remains. It's not. There are things that any 2 reasonable people can agree are abhorrent. So releasing a relativism about religion is.
Tony, go back to what the 2 you have said. Actually, there's something interesting there, because I think you mentioned Canada, and also the South. Someone mentioned the South, and I don't disparage anybody, but it seems like when you know less about anything,
right?
It's the opposite end of that spectrum of the less you know, the more religion you'll sort of hang on to. But the more you know, it seems, I'm not saying it all the time, but the more you know, sometimes you start letting go of religion.
Right. I think that's exactly right.
Is it a crutch? Is it a religion?
I think there's self-selection here. I think that's because when you think it through, you really can't adhere to those fundamentalist ideas. They start to fall away, and so I think that's why. I think there's the answer to your question.
There's actually, I just posted a really interesting article about that. It was linking education and life, like where your life is basically, and religion. So like the worse your life is, like however you want to say, like the poorer you are, the more dismal your life is, the more you adhere to religion because it gives you hope. That's why they linked the countries. Sweden's the #1 country for being least religious and most, not profitable, but most economically.
Better life of living.
Right. And so it showed this link of as the country gets better, religion goes down because you don't need it as much.
It's more equitable society.
But then the interesting part with that, actually, I kind of looked into that too, is that America is actually kind of an outlier because being one of the most developed countries, it's actually also one of the most religious countries. So it kind of doesn't fit into that sort of development, less religion.
But it's economic building. It's not like that. They do that happiness scale kind of thing where it brings into like equal opportunities and like like health and all the different factors. I think economically, sure, yeah, we might be an outlier, but when we put all the factors together, we actually drop in that list.
Right.
And further on that, the U.S. also has a very high income inequality.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you still,
Thank
that,
you.
just the differences in perception. So people on the low end are going to have this distance of why don't I have what those people on the high end
That's the majority, right?
Yes.
So it kind of
Mississippi's the
drives them
perfect
towards,
example of
just
that.
towards religion and other things.
Mississippi's the most religious and the least economically advanced.
Yeah.
And the Bible Belt and Tornado Alley coincide.
So we all agree?
Kumbaya. Right.
Yeah, preaching to the choir.
I'm a little puzzled how you use the word solipsism. I mean, usually that's defined as the position in philosophy that says, I only know that I exist. But it seems like you're using it in a sense that says that people willfully deceive themselves, or am I getting that right?
Yeah, that if something is, if something is true in your, your worldview, then it's subjectively true. That's the way Hitchens uses it, to critique religion.
Cartesian would probably agree.
Sorry?
I mean, Descartes would probably agree more so. He really didn't believe in, he believed everything that a person sort of thought or felt was very subjective and therefore kind of false in that way, because it lacked any sort of universalist thoughts or idioms. I don't know, I mean, kind of help me out, I'm not too clear, but...
Well, I mean, there's this standard criticism of Descartes that he doesn't get out of solipsism after he proves that he exists in what,
It's a
the
good
third
criticism.
meditation or whatever.
Right. It's a good criticism. He doesn't really go anywhere. He starts very early on bringing in
That's
transcendental
actually
beliefs.
still an important
Yeah.
argument, because if you say that God doesn't exist, I mean, you can't disprove the evil demon, but does that mean you can prove that God doesn't exist? I mean, some people say, yes, I know God doesn't exist. Do they know in an absolute sense the way they know the truths of mathematics? Or is it just really, really likely, like,
But God's like a Rorschach test.
He is.
What God are you going to disprove?
I think most skeptics would have to make all their claims conditionally anyway, right? They would have to say conditionally, I act as if there's no God because I see no evidence.
Right.
Would be probably the best position, at least the most rational and most defensible. I'm not saying that absolutely 100% there is no God. I'm saying I see no evidence to believe in one, and therefore I will act as if there is no God in my life because that's defensible. Until you show me proof, I'll have to adjust.
I think when atheists say, I know God doesn't exist, most atheists don't do that.
Right.
But then people are like, of course you don't know that. And so there's the view that, okay, you're claiming to know more than you actually know. But if you say it's really unlikely, okay, yes. I mean, I can't disprove Descartes' demon that's deceiving him exists, but, who believes that?
It's like Bertrand Russell's, teapot.
Right.
There's no, the teapot, it's an absurd proposition that there's a teapot orbiting the Earth controlling our destinies. So we don't have to disprove it.
Right.
Yeah, who's the burden of proof on?
Right. And to me, it's just absurd to believe in an anthropomorphic, paternalistic God that hates gays, thinks women should be subjugated to their husbands, is okay with genocide, to further sectarianism, is okay with slavery as long as you don't enslave your own people. Again, sectarian doctrine. I think if you look at all these doctrines and think about the underlying motivation, sectarianism, I don't see how you can walk away and not conclude that this had a very specific agenda and it's not divinely inspired. It's too inconsistent to be divinely inspired. It's too primitive to be inspired by an omniscient being. The textual analysis disproves religion.
Also, subjugating flora and fauna for the subjugation of man. Because we're the human race.
Right.
Let's destroy the earth because it's the same mentality, which doesn't make any sense.
Ricky Gervais did a really funny video about that. He did about Mozart. He just explains,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, so God comes down and sees people fighting and he goes, oh, that's it, I'm going to kill everybody. We're going to wipe everybody
Right.
out. It's the extremists of, what? Like, how do you,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like God is it's like he has we're his ant farm, you know,
Yeah.
we exist for his entertainment or sadistic pleasure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, even if like atheists, there are atheists like Ricky Gervais, he actually said this on Piers Morgan, I think. He said something along the lines of, I wouldn't want to be in a world where, you know, there would be people that wouldn't even have the choice to be religious.
Right.
He says, I would fight even for those people to have the choice to follow a religion or not. So that's kind of interesting because there are some atheists, such as I think yourself, that you would want to kind of almost shake the religious folks and kind of tell them, hey, come on, you know, get a brain sort of, right? Not to be harsh. But, you know, there's also the other side of atheists where they kind of want that freedom of choice, to pursue whatever you want in life.
Not kind of, you know, it's off the table, you know.
Yeah.
I always tell everybody, I'm like, I would never question anybody's faith. Keep your faith, but throw away your religion. It's the religion that drives all this insanity, you know, like,
Yeah.
if you want to believe in invisible people, go right ahead. However,
Well, except,
you
yeah,
know,
But it's that belief that generates
Yeah.
the
Well,
religion.
but it's not
So
the
we
belief.
do need to eliminate invisible people.
I disagree. I don't think believing in God doesn't make you hate people. It's when you say, I believe in God and I'm going to follow this religion, what tells me to hate
well,
all
except
these
that,
people.
you know, religion for some people is just a ritual life, completely divorced from their faith. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was kind of getting off this topic though, Dan's not done. Okay. One thing I think that is important to develop, I think, especially for the atheist community, is something Professor Blaze actually brought up to me in a class one time. And it was Sam Harris's talk on the illusion of free will. Because a lot of religion is driven on, we have free will, we have to make the right choices to get where we want to be. Well, if, has anyone seen his talk on the illusion of free will?
I've read some of the stuff he says in this book, but I haven't
Oh,
heard
great.
him
Well,
talk
basically,
about it.
it's that you, there's correlation in neural systems before decisions that you consciously make that can tell what you're going to decide. So, you know, your brain is simply a learning mechanism and just out, you know, it just spits out whatever answer it has to the inputs that go in. So it's not, there's no actual decision making, there's no free will, that sort of thing. And I think that if we were to develop that further, it would kind of go back, because a lot of religion is based on, you know, doing the right things to get to the right place. Well, if you have no free will and you're simply a kind of a reflection of the society and the environment you're put in, then the big thing about living is going to be making the right system to live in to produce the best people, rather than following a certain doctrine to be the best person you can be. And taking away that individualism, being more collective, would be probably the best thing that I see.
You know, that reminds me of the, I think Sam Harris also talks about, if your consciousness can survive your body, then shouldn't there be, the God hypothesis, shouldn't there be emotions, experiences, thoughts that don't register on a brain scan? And, you know, if you die in a state where you're cognitively compromised, what version of your consciousness is preserved?
Right, yeah, we know when the brain is injured, I mean,
Yeah,
people can't function normally.
right, aphasia, patience.
Don't buy the no free will or anything.
Sorry?
That's it.
What was that?
You know, in regards to the, where does moral accountability come from if there's no free will, though? That's an important question, right? Because there's still I mean, it's not just a matter of keeping people locked up because they have brain damage. So suppose I start hitting them. So stop hitting me. I can't. I have no free will. Well, it seems like I have the ability to choose to do otherwise.
Right.
Unless that's a deeply profound illusion.
I think the main thing is like looking at, you know, put it into a kind of contemporary thing, people against education in prison systems. They're kind of saying, oh, those people are they're just bad people, they made the wrong decision, that sort of thing. Where someone who doesn't believe in free will would be like, no, the system that we made, the system that we live in, made these people. No, because obviously people are born with different genetic differences, and so people are going to be different. And so, and however inequitable our society is, it will produce, you know, people on both sides, people that are very good and people that just aren't good. And obviously there's going to be people who are never good enough for society, you just have to keep them locked up and that sort of thing. But improving people would be then the concentration rather than just saying, oh, they're bad, let's keep them away. Moral accountability probably has to be developed a lot more, though, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm afraid of with that argument.
You know, Daniel Dennett does get into that in a book that's subtitled, I can't remember the actual, Breaking, no, it's But anyway, the subtitle is The Types of Free Will Worth Having, and he breaks down every philosophical argument for free will, and he basically gets to something similar to what Harris talks about in his latest book, except that he concentrates more on biological rather than physical things, because Harris tends to be very psychological, and he tends to be very much more biological. But it's a general same thing, that you can have accountability, but it's built in from expectations in society, that we're not necessarily individuals in the world, that we're reflections of the society we live in, and therefore improving society improves people's choices, and therefore limits the kind of bad decisions they might make.
Yeah.
I present to you the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Right.
Tony, I think this is wonderful that you did this. And that, I think it takes some level of courage to do it. Little chutzpah. And I think I just figured out my feeling, and I don't label it atheism or anything, but I think my mom raised me in cafeterianism. She said, take what you need and leave the rest, from your teachers, from me, from your siblings, from anybody. And I think my feeling about it is that I don't need nor want a God. And that's what defines the way I walk around the world. I need friends, I need intellectual discourse, I need books, I need love, but I don't need or want a God.
I love you.
I love you.
And we love your baby.
He loves atheism. He is so into
well,
actually, he was given the magic of reality. Tony gave him the magic of reality as a baby shower gift.
Best shower gift
His first real book, The Magic of Reality. So.
Anybody interested in the question of do religious moderates do more harm than good? Because they're reforming religious community within, but they're also giving cover to fundamentalists.
I'm interested in how that works. So I always want to ask people, what is the cover they provide, and what is the mechanism by which that cover works?
Well, I think it's in insisting on reverence for the faith, the sacred text, insisting on, basically by propping up this exemption that religion has from critical scrutiny. And by affiliation, association.
Actually, I'd like to add something about this religious moderates. They are very dangerous because they not only they are spectrum, they oscillate, because you can bring 5 different religious moderates and they disagree on basic stuff. So everybody does his own moderate du jour, if you will, and they change it from time to time. Because, I have friends, they change their moderation over time.
I think what's important is the moderates, I think they do a better job in allowing for liberty of reason. I think the main problem is just allowing the faith-based argument. I think there's no problem in people, having a faith, but when they bring it to an argument, they have to take that truth that they already believe in and apply, just real life, objective reason to it. So having the faith and allowing people with faith to argue is fine. But when they actually bring up the problem, it has to be objective-based, rather than making them not allowed to have faith before coming in.
Yeah, if you try to find common ground among religions, you're never going to get there. There are certain things that you can only find common ground on if you agree on secular terms.
Kind of going off of that, would we have all the branches going from hundreds of years ago of religion? Essentially Catholicism stayed the same, and then Reformation.
Protestants.
Thank you. They sort of branched off into hundreds and hundreds of religions. That's having absolutely no base to your religion. Is you find your own thing to do, kind of a cafeterianist sort of mentality, and then you kind of pursue that. But then that splits off as when those people within that religion sort of find something else to pursue. It's just
we can always have can preserve that in the humanists versus the skeptics versus the freethinkers versus the.
And what you just said also pertains to, let's say, capitalism. Obviously you have Rome and you have the Pope. I mean, they rule with an iron, fist. So they'll kill anybody. Women, men, whatever, and they've done it before, and I'm sure they'll do it again. The point is, it gets to what Tony was saying, that it has to be, here's the religion, and that's how it'll survive. That's why it has to survive as is, I should say, from that continuum, because they
through fear, through rules, through childhood brainwashing, all that.
And it's the certainty of the truth that is, it's how because what some Bronze Age shepherd revealed this truth, so it's revered thereafter. How can you make statements about cosmology based on that kind of evidence, and then hold your claims up, as equal to, physicists or somebody who really knows what they're talking about?
I have to say that I ran into religious privilege occasionally, and I think that's a moderate
in Cranston?
thing. In Cranston, but also more recently, I spoke on the ultrasound bill that was at the State House in Rhode Island. We had our own version, so I spoke there on that bill, and I noticed that people who brought up religious convictions, religious arguments, when they got into the flow of it, the person in charge, who was actually an abortion supporter, Representative Agello, would not cut them off out of deference to their religious beliefs. But anybody who came up with a secular argument had 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. That was it, and then the buzzer went off, and you were expected to stop.
We're more succinct anyway.
What's that?
We're more succinct anyway.
True. In fact, that is the other thing I noticed, that people on the other side tended to keep their arguments to the right time frame. But other people, they would get very emotional, and then they would be talking about, let's say, their own abortion or something. And as soon as they talked about God and their relationship with God or whatever it was, as soon as that happened, we let that go. We let that slide. And that's not a religious fundamentalist thing. That's basically everybody kind of not thinking, why does this person get to speak longer, have more time? What do we extend to that person just because they're appealing to religion? And that's where that's what I think of it when I think of it in terms of how they give cover to fundamentalists. Now a fundamentalist can get in there, and we had a Catholic priest come in, and he basically kicked one of his parishioners out of a seat and made him go sit in overflow so he could have a seat where he wanted to go.
Wow.
Okay, we had about this much room, 30, 40 people could fit in that room. He came in, oh, Father, how are you doing? He says, oh, great. And he says, mind if I have your seat? And the old man got up and walked into the overflow across the State House.
Spirit there.
Then that's
God will deal
privilege.
with you after you die.
Well, of course, but that's religious privilege that he was willing to accept as a parishioner. But obviously, if you asked me to move my seat, and somebody said, "Why didn't you give your seat to the old guy priest?" I mean, that's I would have probably said no. But people who don't feel fundamentalist would say, "What is your issue?"
For those of you who don't know Steve Alquist, he's Jessica Alquist's father.
Uncle.
Sorry.
It's okay. I get that a lot. It's all right. I know.
The very courageous student in West Cranston who fought the Pearl Banner. So.
My husband wants one of those shirts for his birthday tomorrow.
Oh, you did a thing?
I didn't order it in time, but
we have a
he
model.
wants one of her shirts.
I was wearing one.
You have one? Let me see. Oh. I didn't order it in time. His birthday's tomorrow.
Oh.
You can, they have, like t-shirt making sites, just anywhere, like $10 and get a t-shirt.
Well, but you want to go to the authorized site because it goes to Jessica.
Because it goes to
Oh, I thought she
fund.
was, inferring that they took the site down.
No, they didn't. He just told me he wants one for his birthday. His birthday's tomorrow. I didn't get it in time.
I just like say just really quickly though, like on that same subject, like the Russian priest who got caught with a $30,000 watch on.
Oh, yeah, and had it photoshopped out.
Yeah, it was photoshopped out, but the reflection, you can still see $30,000 watch. While his
You know,
parishioners like starving.
John Stewart had a good take on religious privilege. He was saying that obviously you've mistaken not getting everything you want with persecution.
And that's.
I love that. Yeah.
Amen.
He's too extreme.
Okay.
He's way too left.
Cool.
Live long and prosper.
Get over it. Just get over it.
Thanks.